This is Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt's regular Sunday evening broadcast at 6:45 Eastern Wartime.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the present time, it is of paramount importance that the women and girls of our country be given training so that they may do their share in the war emergency. Hundreds of girls are gaining experience and training in sheet metal work. Such training is essential for many jobs in aircraft and other war industries.
This picture was taken outside of Gusak's Machine Products in Long Island City. And I'm dressed in my work clothes. The first department I was sent into, I stood at a kick press.
I was seeking employment because I really wanted to be a nurse or a teacher. I'd seen enough young mothers with a house full of babies. So 2 other girls and I went to what we called the Defense Training School. And that landed us in the old Chevrolet plant, riveting. That's how Rosie the Riveter came into my life.
Well, it was really hard because we had to wear pants to work in. Nice girls didn't wear pants. And I'd never worn pants in my life.
But you felt you were doing it for the war, you know?
All the day long, whether rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history working for the...
I absolutely love this idea, and I am super curious as to, first, there's the argument of the chicken versus the egg, right? What came first? Did the stories that you collected come first, and then the animation was the part of that you added on, or was it you wanted to do something within this animation realm and this story came about that blended itself together, or was it just the perfect symmetry? I mean, where did this all start? Where was the genesis of this?
Sure. Do you want to take that, Anne? Or do you want me to?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll take the first one. We'll go back and forth.
Perfect.
So the material actually came up to be because we were engaged to do this oral history project for NYU libraries about 10 years ago. NYU has one of the most extensive labor archives in the country, and they were interested in doing a sort of recorded history of these women who had been Rosie the Riveters. There were a lot of oral histories out there, but there really wasn't anything on film, and especially not on HD video. And so we spent a couple of years going around the country and talking to women who were at that point in time in their 80s and 90s about their experiences being Rosie. And we had just never heard a lot of this history and a lot of these stories. And there was the sort of, we were hearing the stuff that we grew up with, that sort of American nostalgia, the sort of patriotic stories of women helping war effort. But we were also hearing all these other stories about women who were earning a living for the first time in their lives, like a real living wage. Women who were traveling from rural parts of the country into the cities and the manufacturing centers and having these extraordinarily life-changing experiences. And also hearing these stories about some of the struggles in terms of gender equity, in terms of pay equity, in terms of racial equity that we think of now, the experiences we have now, but they were experiencing these things in that different age. And as we were making the interviews, we realized that we really wanted to do something with the stories. But we didn't know exactly how to do it because we had all these sort of talking heads of women but we didn't have any other background material. There was no footage of them as young people, as young women. And so we sort of fell on this idea that we could use animation to sort of bring their golden moments to life. And the first thing we did was we called up a wonderful animator named Emily Hubley, who is a just brilliant woman who's incredibly involved in the animation circles, and said, we have this idea that we'd like to do this using women animators. You know, could we want to do a workshop? Could you help us figure out who to use? And she made some introductions to us. And in that first group of animators was the remarkable Danielle Ash, whose work you see in the pieces now. And so that's coming out of that workshop process was we decided we have to make a film with Danielle. Her style is so perfect for the factories and the sort of mechanical aspects of it, but also just the inventiveness and how surprising her animation was. Felt like a really good match for how surprised we were by some of the stories.
One of the things that was really fascinating working with all these women animators and their incredibly different styles was, you know, they were of varying ages, and they were also pioneers in the field of animation, like as women in a very sort of male dominated, you know, career. You know, they were pushing boundaries, and they had, you know, really connected to the Rosie stories because they had also faced a lot of these similar challenges. So that was a really fun discovery in the process of making this art. And then, you know, with Danielle, what we really saw was this sort of hands-on maker aspect to her work that was really connecting to the Rosies and kind of their stories of, we were just so happy to be making things with our hands. We were brought into these ways where we were, you know, incredibly useful, where not that any careers earlier that women might have had, which were much more domestic careers, but it was like this new world that these Rosies could walk into and feel incredibly at the center of this war effort, and that what they were doing was so highly valuable. So that was really all the sort of exciting things started really coming about through the animation workshop, and then as we continued forward, specifically with Danielle.
Were you on set when she was filming and putting these together, or was it that you gave her footage and she just played off of that? How did the collaboration work?
Yeah, it was a learning process for sure. You know, we had never made an animated film. We'd made a lot of documentary films.
Sure.
So, you know, we were working on the scripts and kind of making the selects from these sort of hour or two long interviews from each of the women. And so we were putting together the scripts. We would give pieces of that script to Danielle. She would come back. You know, at times we were there in the studio with her, but it takes so much time. And so she was just having to work on it whenever she could. And then she would send back animations and we would adjust the script. So it was just this back and forth until it really became this one arc of a full film.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting too, because like you were saying, and a lot of these women hadn't experienced certain things, and the one particular the thing that comes to mind is the woman who was talking about she'd never wore pants before, and things like that, and it's just like people would be blown, their minds would be blown that that's something that is.
That was a similarity in a lot of the women that we interviewed, was the freedom to dress differently. But that was something that really, the idea of putting on pants and putting your hair up in a hairnet and not wearing makeup and pantyhose, but going in and doing work was really unfamiliar to women at that point. And it was a really big deal. Also, we heard from a lot of women. I think Susan in the film talks about how she really wanted to have more than 2 pairs of shoes. And coming out of the Depression, a lot of the women talked about the freedom to sort of have money to spend on themselves in that way, on clothing, Kirsten, do you want to tell the story about your grandma Bonnie? How she talked to us, because Kirsten's grandmother was also a Rosie. She's not in this particular short film, but we did interview her for the NYU project, and she had this. Well, you tell the story.
Yeah, no, and I never really knew that she was a Rosie, and she didn't really talk about herself as a Rosie. But as I was talking about the project, she was like, "Well, wait a minute. I went to work in the factories." And we were sort of expanding this idea of the Rosie just not as this, we can do it poster girl, but like all these women who went to work. And so she had such interesting stories. Like she was coming off of the farm and had never been to the city before. And, she was so excited to be working, and earning her own money. And so she said the first thing she did was she was really excited to buy bras. And so she ended up buying 27 bras and was just excited about being able to do that. And so she had such a specific memory of the number of bras that she had bought with her own money. It was kind of amazing.
The whole feel of this, going back in time and the nostalgia that you create with not only the animation part of it, but the music. You have famous quotes in there. You have a lot of and these women, of course, retelling the stories that they tell. And I'm curious from your perspectives, how important was that authenticity to you in making this story really sing and really come alive? Was that really the glue and the catalyst to making this film and having this film out there?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely something we knew we wanted to bring in, sort of the world that they lived in. And what we didn't want to do sort of a traditional black and white photograph, stock footage film. We really wanted to use things that made us feel like we were there. But we also wanted the world to be really self-contained. And initially we thought we would only use the animation. And in working with the story, we realized that we needed to see their faces now, because we needed to understand that emotional connection to them as older women looking back at this time, in addition to being back in that time itself. And also we used a couple different framing mechanisms that we played with. And ultimately we ended up bringing Eleanor Roosevelt in and actually creating that lovely animation of Eleanor herself, because we wanted something that went beyond the ladies in that moment. And Eleanor really seemed like the glue that could hold us together. And of course, she's mentioned in the footage by one of the women. So it seemed to make sense that was it. And the music was really important to pulling it together. Music is so important in film in general, and the music of that time just has such a life to it. So we wanted to use it as much as we could to create that environment.
And we also worked with another female, a composer, a female composer who had written a lot in this kind of time period as well. So we were able to use this combination of, recorded original composition with the actual, nostalgic songs. And we found a lot of pieces from, and you found a bunch of them. What were they exactly?
We used some stuff that was from like the Army Band, that stuff that was created literally during the war, and some popular music from that time as well. And then using that along with some more sort of like documentary soundtrack music to help blend it together. We worked with a phenomenal sound designer on this piece, whose work not only with the music, but with creating, most of what she did was to create the sound environments around those factories. And, it's interesting because we had the piece finished when we brought her in, and her bringing in all those little sounds of the machines and the airplanes and the drill presses and the pigeons in the air. Like it was almost like you just turned the volume up on the whole piece. It just all of a sudden came together in this way that was really magical for us as filmmakers, because you imagine in your mind, but to actually have it come together was really, really special.
I mean, 20 years of filmmaking for the two of you, and together, doing it together. And you've been through the evolution of the documentary. You've been through the evolution of these processes, and you know, you probably started shooting on film, and then now you probably shoot digitally, I would assume. And so you've seen even the evolution of film in its and all its you know, glory and everything that's gone on in the industry. But do you feel like this movie, that taking the time to make this movie became at the right movie at the right time kind of idea? Because you know, if you had started with this 20 years ago, do you think you would have even had something even remotely close to what you have now? I mean, documentaries have taken such a life form, right? I mean, it has become, it is evolved, and the narrative aspect of a documentary becomes even more important now than it ever was. I mean, probably 20 years ago, if you shot this, you would have probably just had the interviews and ran it right through, right? I mean, that's the kind of style the documentary was looking at 20 years ago.
Right.
Do you feel like the right time, you know, this is the right place, right time kind of idea, or was it your experience that you evolved and created this?
It gave me the sense of freedom to look at the sort of raw material of documentary differently. And to be a little bit more, to push a little bit more at the boundaries of what it could be. And, you know, I was really lucky to also work on another project just as a co-producer. It wasn't my film. I was working for another director, where I got to produce some sections of animation for that piece. And I was doing that, you know, after we had begun Rosie, but before we finished it. And so it was really interesting for me to, you know, to look at how animation can contribute to documentary, how it pushes at a different place of memory, and that piece we used the animation to bring to life the poetry written by one of the characters, one of the subjects of the film. And so having it occupy this place of, it's still very much primary source material, it's still very much true to documentary, but you're really using it to explore a much more internal or creative aspect of what you're doing. So I find that just having the experience where it gave me able to like punch out the walls a little bit, if that makes sense, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, the playfulness. I mean, we had both, you know, through the beginning of working on Rosie, we were finishing up our, like, you know, very, very intensive feature film about homeless high school students in the Chicago public schools. And, you know, like, really focusing on these, like, intense journeys of these kids who were walking through these incredible obstacles, and they were keep going, and they were just so inspiring. You know, this really took on another part of the brain, and it was, I think, for me, it was a sort of coping, almost like way of coping in, and also seeing the humor and the playfulness and the sort of idea of journey over time, and how one's kind of, you know, retrospective of that time still needs to be so important, and it can be revealing, you know, like, you know, we were just so blown away by these women who were in their elder phase of their lives, and that we really felt that time with them was sacred. Because, I mean, it's so beautiful. She's like, who in society do we ignore the most? Older women. We don't listen to them, you know. And you know, to have that space and time for them to talk and be filmed and feel like they could, that those memories were incredibly valuable to us and to society. I mean, that sort of drove us, or definitely me, in terms of just pushing at the playfulness and pushing at, their joy in their memory, and how they connected the dots to how that moment in time affected the rest of their life, beyond the sort of traditional "we were patriots," or like we, this sort of like rosy rose-colored glasses time of World War II that can often just be, sit there. This was like peeling back layers and layers, and that so inspired us, I think, to keep being playful and reaching for that within the creation of the piece.
Mm-hmm. In this day and age right now, where we're at in time, episodics are huge, and Netflix series and putting things out there are huge. And I can imagine you probably have tons of footage that you didn't use in this 15 minutes that you had. Is there been discussion about putting more of this out there? Maybe even maybe doing a sequel, doing a feature, or doing this as an episodic? Have you had that discussion? Because I think this would be amazing, an amazing series. Obviously, it would be just these women, but you probably couldn't have a season 2 or season 3 unless you kept going forward with time. And I don't know how much you want to be involved in and be responsible for the time of all women, but that being said, I mean, has there been discussion about what you're going to do with the rest of what you've captured and created?
I mean, so originally we had wanted to do a series of 10 short animated films, about 3 to 5 minutes each, kind of one per woman. We have this list of like 10 golden stories that we really want to tell. Sort of realities of independent filmmaking and funding and time and sustainability, that really morphed into this project, where these first 3 women really fit together really well. And we kept wanting to work with Danielle. And so we made this one kind of slightly longer piece, but we have those rest of those 7 other golden nugget stories that we would love to turn into, a series. We've talked about a couple of different models. A lot of it depends on, funding. I mean, we have this list of female animators who we love, that we would love to pair up with each of these stories. That would kind of be our ideal sense of a series. But we got to this point and we said, let's see how this does in the world and how the world meets it, and where we can really get this into, and then maybe this can be a springboard.
What do you love about being indie filmmakers?
I love the tremendous amount of freedom we have in working on the stories we want to work on. There is a lot of energy within that space, and also that we're able to take the time to really uncover very complex layers within a story.
Yeah, I guess I would say that just personally, especially with documentary, it gives me the opportunity to not only get to know a lot of people that I would never otherwise get to know, but it gives me a chance to actually be very intimate with people.
Nice.
In terms of really immersing myself in their humanity and in their particular journey. And it's a really rare privilege. In some ways, I think all we have as human beings is our story. It's the only thing that can't sort of be taken away from us. And so to be given the opportunity to tell people's stories is a really powerful, powerful thing. And I feel constantly privileged to be able to do it.
Yeah, film is such a collaborative medium. Even in documentary, it's collaborative in a lot of respects. But this especially, I'm really curious about how much trepidation did you have going into making this leap into, because this is a leap of complete faith in terms of collaborating, right? I mean, this is like smashing two mediums together in some respects, and two worlds together. I mean, stop animation is in itself an art form, and of course a film art form, but it is never been mashed together with this kind of intent with real life. And I'm curious, from your perspectives, was there intrepidation, and what eased it for you? When did you feel like you had this together and was ready to, put this thing out there?
I mean, I would say one of the things that, is really at the heart of Anne and my long-term partnership as filmmakers and collaborators. I mean, it's not easy always to have a partner in that kind of, when you're a director, right? Or you're a producer, and you might often bounce around and work with different people. But Anne and I, we've been working together for over 20 years, and it's been the best partnership ever in terms of artistic collaboration for me. And I really give that credit a lot to, we both really grew up in theater, and we both really did a lot around different kinds of really risk-taking ensemble-based theater, and learned how to work with all different kinds of people. And in fact, I think both of us really get off on that. We like that risk of, okay, something is magical about this person. How are we all going to work together? And I think that anticipation, I think, is what drives us in a lot of our projects, even when we're facing projects that are, not as playful or adventurous. They might be darker or social issue driven or whatever that is. But I do think that sense of adventure and that deep past of collaboration within the theater has really helped us a lot.
Yeah. And I think that this project, so we filmed these interviews for the first time in 2010, so 10 years ago. And the process of sort of developing what we might want to do with it, I think holding that animation workshop was really key, because it gave us a chance to really play around with ideas over a number of days with a number of really talented artists, and sort of help us to understand our own process within this art form that we weren't really comfortable with at that point. So I think that it's about also giving yourself enough time to get to that decision. And once we got into production, we were still, 4 or 5 years in production with this piece in Danielle's workshop. And, we started off thinking it might be a piece just about Esther's story. But then really started to want to integrate these other women's experiences, because all three of these women really touch on ideas of diversity and the challenges that faced when you had never had men and women working together. You had never had African Americans working so closely with white Americans. And so it seemed like the stories wove together in this really beautiful way. But we were really, because this was such a passion project for everyone involved, and because it took a long time, we were able to give ourselves that time to explore and to have these really deep conversations about the piece that we wanted to make. And I think you don't get that luxury a lot with more commercial work. You don't get the luxury to sit on an idea for a year and talk about it and work through your pros and cons and what you're thinking. So sometimes when you're in it, it can feel really slow and God, we're not making any progress. And but again, I really think the biggest key to making anything meaningful is you just don't stop. You just keep going, So.
Yeah. Note to self: don't ever play these three ladies in Trivial Pursuit World War II edition.
Especially the women's perspective there.
Yeah.